I have made it my mission every day. I wake up and try to figure out how to get this message of Go for No out into the world. And the message behind Go for No is really very simple one. It is about intentionally increasing your failure rate, intentionally being willing to hear no more often in order to get more yeses in your life, whether that's from a business perspective, whether you're fundraising or just trying to achieve some goal that you have. It's actually embracing failure and embracing no to get to yes.
Andrea Waltz is part of a husband-wife team who speak about the mindset needed for successful selling. And let's face it, we're all selling something to someone every single day. How do you get around the fear of rejection? How do you get what you want? The solution, according to Andrea in her book, Go for No, is to get out of your comfort zone and challenge your mindset about perfectionism, people pleasing, and a host of other inbred habits we all have. This is a podcast for absolutely everybody. Please welcome Andrea to Bump in the Road. Andrea, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Hi, Pat. I'm so glad to be with you. So let's see, where should I begin my story? I guess I'll start with my entrepreneurial journey. I was working at a company called Lens Crafters. Most people probably recognize that, the eyeglass retailer. I met my now husband there, and he convinced me that we should launch a company, speaking and training, based on a concept that he had kind of stumbled into, created. I know we'll talk about it, called Go for No. And I was just naive enough, luckily, young enough that it sounded like a great plan to leave this corporate job that I had been in for just a few years. And we launched our company. I had no idea what I was doing. My background before that was I had held several retail jobs with escalating responsibility. And the last job I had was as general manager of a lens crafter store. So I was one of the youngest managers running a $3 million location, the lab side where you make the glasses and the retail side where you sell the glasses. And my education was getting a Bachelor of Science degree in criminal justice. So now I'm an entrepreneur trying to sell speaking and training, and had to learn how to do that, which was actually really fun and really challenging. And so for the last 25 years, I have made it my mission every day. I wake up and try to figure out how to get this message of Go for No out into the world. And the message behind Go for No is really very simple one. It is about intentionally increasing your failure rate, intentionally being willing to hear no more often in order to get more yeses in your life, whether that's from a business perspective, whether you're fundraising or just trying to achieve some goal that you have. It's actually embracing failure and embracing no to get to yes. So that's just a little thumbnail sketch.
Well, Go for No is the book is absolutely terrific. And I think the thing that really struck me about the book is you're taking the biggest pain point that people experience, which is having somebody say no. It's very easy to take it personally, and you're turning it into an asset.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and we like to say that we couldn't have written that book if we ourselves didn't struggle with fear of rejection. In fact, Richard, my husband and co-author, his story basically is that he had a crippling fear of rejection. He didn't want to hear anybody tell him no, and learned to overcome that by having an experience where he was selling suits for a living. The district manager kind of challenged him and asked him one day after he had this really good sale, what did that customer say no to? And Richard had to admit that the customer didn't say no to anything, that everything he laid in front of this guy purchased. And then the district manager asked him the really important question, which was, then how did you know he was done? If the guy never said no to anything and you just kept laying clothing in front of him, how did you know? And Richard had to admit that he was selling from his own wallet, basically, that he didn't want to hear no from this person. And when Richard told me that story, that was one of like the shifts that made me willing to quit and to go off on our own and to spread this message to the world, corporate world, mostly through speaking engagements. Because in that moment, Pat, I realized that while I thought I was a superstar salesperson, the truth was I didn't like to hear no either. That I'm kind of a people pleaser.
Hmm.
And to me, if somebody is going to tell me no, then that means I didn't do something right. Or maybe it means that you don't like me, because I really saw no as a bad thing. And so we we're not out there as these smooth, suave, ultra charismatic sales gurus going like, "Hey, just get out there and get yes. Stop whining over a no." We're the opposite. We're like, "No is real. Rejection happens, but here's how to look at it differently."
How do you get comfortable with no?
I think the biggest thing is just exposure therapy. It's to hear it more often. And one of the fun things that we created over the last few years was something called a Go for No 21-day challenge. You could do a 30-day challenge, you could do a 7-day challenge, you could do a 24-hour challenge. And this challenge is about going out and trying to hear no more often. The interesting thing is, this is not a new phenomenon. I mean, hearing no in relationship to selling, of course, has been around since selling has been around, since people who sell for a living are going to get rejected. Not everybody says yes to you, no matter the product or the service. But probably, gosh, it's probably been at least 15 years. There was a guy named Jason Comey up in Canada, and I don't know where, I think maybe a Toronto area, who came up with this idea of rejection therapy. And fundamentally, it was go out and get rejected to silly, stupid stuff. Just get exposed to having people say no to you and see that you survived. So it could be anything. It could be walking into a sandwich shop saying, "Hey, can I get a free sandwich?" And having them look at you like you're a lunatic and telling you no, and then you turn and walk out. Just go, right, just going through that experience and seeing that, hey, you survived it. A few years after that, a guy named Jia Zhang, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, he wrote a book called Rejection Proof. But he took Jason's idea of rejection therapy and he decided to do his own experiment. For 100 days, every single day, he decided he was going to get rejected to do something. And they were all kinds of fun experiments. And I remember when he was doing this, because he was actually doing it on social media. He was posting on Twitter, he was making videos of his rejection experiments every single day. And some of them were really simple and weird. One day I remember he would go and he asked people on the street if he could give them $5. And of course, people are so skitsy about,
Yeah.
that seems too good to be true, that they actually told him no to that. On the flip side, of course, he had a day where he asked for money. He was on a Southwest flight and asked if he could speak on the the loudspeaker, and they let him do it. They let him talk to the passengers. He went into a mattress store and asked if he could take a nap on one of the mattresses, which they absolutely obliged. I think that's probably a good sales tactic anyway for them. But every day was some kind of therapy. And so this is something that I do as well, much more in a business setting, much more related to what your business is on a day-to-day basis. But the idea really is exposure, I think. And too many times we get so caught up in the what ifs and how I look and how I'm perceived that we stop going for no. We stop putting ourselves in a position to hear no. And so the only way around that is to start doing it, but you don't know what the results are going to be. So you have to get comfortable with the idea that when you start practicing hearing no, you are going to experience more no's.
One of the things that was really interesting in your book, you said that you should ask people why they're saying no.
Yeah, and that, it's interesting about that. That works sometimes and other times it doesn't. If I was going back and I wanted to really wordsmith it, I actually teach something slightly different today, which is whenever you want to know why somebody said no to you, the best way to do it is to ask them what made them say no, just so that it doesn't look too accusatory.
Uh-huh.
Right? Because we
Yeah.
know that we know that when people do give us a no, it's and you think about yourself. You think about times where somebody's asked you out, or they've asked you if you wanna go to a party, or they ask you anything, and you almost and there's a funny meme out there that goes, "What am I doing on Friday night? I don't know. It depends on what you're asking me to do," right? And then I'll decide if I'm free or not. So we all get asked for things, and we feel hesitant to say no because we don't want to hurt the other person's feelings. So you have to be mindful that when you go for no and you start asking for things, that sometimes people are going to shy away from telling you no. So there's two pieces to this. One is making people comfortable that no is something that you can handle, that you'd rather have them tell you no than just not respond at all,
Mhm.
or lie to you and placate you and tell you yes, and then later end up canceling, or later end up telling you that they really didn't want to do it. So no is perfectly fine. And then if they do tell you no, saying, do you mind if I ask you this question? What made you say no? It's less accusatory, so that people don't feel like they're defensive, like saying no was somehow wrong of them.
I always assume no means not now in 99% of the cases. And what the thing that I would say to somebody is, mind if I follow up in 3 months, 6 months? People almost always say no, they don't mind because they want to be nice. But if you're really persevering, it's a good strategy to stay in front of them.
Yeah, follow up and approaching no that way is absolutely essential. It is a key cornerstone to the go for no philosophy, that no doesn't mean never, no means not yet. That is absolutely something that is it's true. And when you get a really good no though, I mean you get somebody that is just like, no, never going to happen,
Yeah.
not doing it. That's great too, right? That saves us a lot of time, saves us a lot of angst of having to second guess. But a lot of it is just throwing up the hand and saying, I'll never do that. I mean, we all we all said, I'm not putting my credit card into the internet to buy something and have it floating out there so everybody can steal my credit card number, right? So we all said no to that at the very early stages.
There's
And
still
then
people saying no to that.
you're probably right. I didn't even think about that. But for the most part, right, we're fine with that. Now we throw our credit card all over the place. So there's always this knee-jerk reaction to reject. People don't like change, and they put up their defenses. So as salespeople, or if you're asking people to do anything that's new or different, I remember walking through a Whole Foods not too long ago, and this lady was giving out samples of this dip, and a lot of people just kind of walked by and said no, almost out of habit, I think. Well, I don't pass up free dip. So I walked over and took a sample, and I am obsessed with this now. It became one of my absolute favorite products. So, one, she's going through a lot of rejection simply because people are just putting up their hand out of habit almost. And two, when you do finally get somebody to try, it's amazing how sometimes they can become your biggest advocates. You just have to hang in there.
I think we live in a perfectionist society. I mean, everything looks so perfect. Everything's Instagram perfect. We celebrate perfection in many ways, but you get underneath that surface and it gets a little ugly pretty fast. And I think sales is a lot like that. How do you deal with a desire for perfectionism, particularly with intelligent, high achieving people in a sales environment?
It's probably the biggest struggle, and I do see it in our Go for No challenge, because one of the things that we do is meet every 7 days to talk about how the week went. And you're right, the people that go through the challenge are typically people who have a growth mindset.
Mhm.
They believe that they can get better at the skills of communication and sales and all of that. And so that's why they're there, right? And to push, to get accountability and push themselves outside their comfort zone. At the same time, though, I tell them all the time, you know, don't, you're not trying to come back here to this meeting to get a gold star, to get an A plus. I want you to come back having fallen on your face. Tell me a story of something that didn't go right. Instead, the mindset is always, okay, I'm going to do the go for a challenge. I'm going to go out. I'm going to get a bunch of no's, but I'm going to score a huge yes and come back to the group and tell everybody my fabulous story. I think that's what most people are thinking. That's what they want to happen. Of course, we ultimately all want yeses, but it's the falling on your face, being willing to be imperfect that I'm pushing people to work on. And it's hard. I find that people have sometimes a tremendous amount of anxiety. And I say to them, you're not trying to go for yes. You don't worry about the yes. What you're trying is to do the attempt. And if it doesn't go well, so be it. Let's work through that discomfort. And so, to your point, it is a struggle. It is a relearning. It's almost a reparenting of oneself, of having to go back and really encourage yourself. It's not about being perfect. It is about trying. It is about messing up and being horrible.
One of the things you point out is this yes no dichotomy. It puts us on an emotional roller coaster. No, 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 no. It just gets drummed into us. And yes, yay, I got it. And then you're back to no, 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 no. I mean, it's just emotionally brutal. How do you start making yes and no neutral?
Yeah, and this is a really important, I guess I'll call it a skill. It's both so much of this is both mindset and having the right mindset around it and skill. And when I say skill, I mean just the practice of it. It's almost like yoga. They call yoga a practice. You
Yeah.
get actually get into the movements, right? Well, dealing with your emotions, I think, when it comes to rejection also becomes a practice. And so, one of the ways that you get off that emotional roller coaster is by checking in with your feelings. And when you start feeling that whether it's depression or anxiety or nervousness or stress of any kind, uh, a really important strategy is to change your state in that moment and don't let yourself spiral into I'm doing it wrong and where you start bashing yourself and this is all I'm terrible at this, I should just give up. It's immediately changing your state. So listen to something uplifting like your favorite music, watch comedy on YouTube, get out from behind your desk, take a walk, shift your perspective, because it's amazing what can happen when you just kind of scratch the record and you keep the record from playing that same roller coaster thing over and over, like where you find that you do those same behaviors and think the same thoughts. You've got to scratch that record. So that's a big part of it.
It sounds like you have to establish personal boundaries that are pretty strong. And yet you have to retain the ability to connect with people. How do you do that? I think that's hard. Um, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, like and tell me, dig into that just a little bit.
Mhm.
Like what is kind of the underlying thing that made you ask that question?
I think that you need to establish boundaries to deal with a lot of no's. And I think just a no based on business is easy enough to deal with. But I think a no that is personal, and you get those too, is very difficult to deal with. So you have the issue of how do you establish boundaries that allow you to emotionally survive some of this?
Yeah, that is okay. I'm glad that you explained that, and you're so right. So a few things about this. One is, and this idea of taking no personally is one of the best books that I read on this. You've probably read it, Pat, because you're so into personal growth and development. It's called The Four Agreements.
Hmm.
And one of the four agreements is about not taking things personally.
Yeah.
And this was my biggest challenge. So I think that when you're in sales and when you're in business, even though you may be selling a widget, it's hard to distance yourself from even the fact that you may not didn't make the widget. You may have nothing to do with the widget. It's not your company. You're just selling them. And yet when you call somebody to talk about the widget and they say no to you, it still feels personal. And I think the reason that rejection feels personal in every sense, in every state that we're gathering knows, is that we are biologically wired to not get rejected, to not get thrown out of the tribe,
Yeah.
and right, and have to survive on our own. We're supposed to be collaborative. We're supposed to have those connections. And so now in this day and age, though, our brains certainly haven't caught up to anything that we're doing today. Our brains haven't caught up to technology. Our brains haven't caught up to anything. And so here we are trying to distance ourselves, have those boundaries, as you said, which I like. I think that's a really accurate way of portraying it, is understanding that this is not about me personally. So that takes a lot of work. And one of the things that I have learned to do and that we teach is to really value and respect the agency of someone else and their right to
Mhm.
say no as much as you value it in yourself. So I'll give you an example. It's kind of funny. Several years ago, we had another book that we wrote, and we've written a few different books in addition to Go for No, but we had another book. And like all authors, when you write a book, of course, you jump onto Amazon because you're dying to
Welcome to the
see.
rejection bandwagon.
That's right. Exactly. Yes, because you're going to get some negative reviews. And I went to Amazon one day. I don't know why, probably just to see what the reviews were on this book. And I saw a 1 star. Now, immediately I had a visceral physical reaction because that's part of what happens with rejection is you feel it. It can feel like a sensation of pain. Research shows that rejection can feel like pain. For me, it feels very unsettling. I get very nervous. I have a very nervous feeling. So in the pit of my stomach, I felt that and immediately recognized it. And I think that's one of the powerful things that you can do to work on your rejection and how you respond is to be mindful that there's nothing wrong with those physical feelings and that they will pass, that they're not going to linger. But just kind of be mindful and let those physical feelings move through you. And so I noticed the feeling, and then I thought, okay, now let me read what this person said. And it was scathing. It was scathing. It was
Oh,
this book was not worth the paper it's printed
I'm
on.
sorry. Anybody who leaves a scathing review has never written a book.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, so this gets more interesting though, I have to tell you. So I read the whole review and I think to myself, and I'm trying to practice what I preach, right? So I'm like, all right, when is a time where I hated something, someone's work like this? This guy hated this. It's fair. It's fair for him. I don't
Mhm.
agree with it. Other people don't, but it's fair for him, and I've got to respect that and value that. Because if I don't, then how do I even value the positive? I can't value the positive without at least respecting the negative. And so I thought, what are the things that I don't like? And I thought back to a movie that Richard and I walked out of called Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. It was like an Academy Award winning movie. And so I proceeded to type a reply, which you can no longer do on
Yeah.
Amazon. That has changed. But and I don't actually recommend doing this because you could get into all kinds of back and forth. But I typed a reply and I said, "Hey, I appreciate you reading the book, at least giving us a chance, right? I understand that it just wasn't for you. Uh, I don't apologize for that. I mean, it just wasn't for you. I get it. I said, I have things I really dislike. And I proceeded to tell the story of walking out of the movie. And so sometimes there's just work that doesn't resonate for us. And I just ended it. It was totally respectful.
Mhm.
And I just felt like I had to kind of get that out there. The crazy part, which I didn't expect, was probably a month or two later, I got a response, and the guy changed his review from 1 to 4 stars and said he went back and reread it, and it was actually a pretty good book. So I don't know if maybe he felt bad that maybe my comments were enough for him to be open minded enough to give it a second look. Whatever the reason, sometimes you're just in a state of mind where you experience something and it's just, maybe you're having a bad day and you eat something and it just tastes terrible because your day is not going the way you want, right? We've all had that.
And you have to take it out on something.
Right, right. Exactly, exactly. So that's kind of a funny thing, but the other thing is that we have interviewed lots of people about this topic, and one of them were some artists that have some really crazy furniture art. They make furniture that is almost looks like it's out of Alice in Wonderland. We loved it. We just thought it was cool. We bought some pieces from them. We think they're the coolest ever. I mean, they'll do like an armoire that's purple that is got a big sharp corner and a rounded bottom, and it looks like it's right out of Alice in Wonderland. And they will go to art shows and they say, you've got to develop really thick skin because people walk by and they don't even hold back their comments, right?
Mm.
They walk by and it's like, oh, I wouldn't ever buy that. Oh, can you believe they're selling that for X amount of dollars? Ugh. And so artists and people like that who literally hear that negative feedback, you've got to learn to separate yourself out from that. And it's hard, Pat. I think it's probably one of the hardest things. And all I can say is when you learn to distance yourself and remember that it is really all about them, and to respect that they have their beliefs, right or wrong, and that has nothing to do with you, and that those beliefs and their opinions were instilled in them long before you showed up and your work showed up. And so to try to almost, it sounds a little overly dramatic, to forgive that and to remember that you do the same, I think is very freeing.
I think it is. I think coming to terms that I think that's a really good way to come to terms with it. I know for me, when I get rejection, my first thought is um, curiosity.
Mm. Yeah.
Why? What did you like? What did you not like? What is the timing wrong? What are the circumstances surrounding this no? That's the question I always have because I'm always, it's just no for now.
Right, right. And that's brilliant.
Well, I don't always get an answer.
Right, sure. Yeah, no, sometimes you don't. Yeah, and you just gotta roll with that too.
How do you integrate vision and goals with just say no?
Yeah, so I think that having a long-term vision, having long-term goals, so important. And where go for no comes in is really the day-to-day tactical. It's really a tactical strategy.
Mhm.
So a lot of times people, I think one challenge is they don't know exactly what they want, and so go for no might not on the surface feel like um, they can really apply it if you don't have this overarching goal. So I'll give you one example. When Richard and I, way back when we kind of first got together, and in addition to starting our business as a side hustle like we had time for this, it was so crazy. We decided that we also wanted to sell scripts in Hollywood. That was our dream. So we lived in Southern California. We moved up to Los Angeles and we decided that the first step was to try to get a agent. And if you can get an agent who agrees to represent a script, they'll take it around to Hollywood and show it around. And so the process of getting the agent is its own crazy process where you send letters. I don't even know if it's like this today, but you send query letters and it kind of tell them a little bit about the script that you have and see if they would be interested in reading the script. That's the first thing. So we said, well, the first thing we're going to do is just send 100 letters out. Like, don't even worry about the yeses. Just we're going to get tons of rejection or nothing. We'll just hear nothing. But let's
Mhm.
just try to get 100 letters out. And we were doing them in groups of 10. So we sent out 10 letters. We got, I don't know, 3 or 4 rejections and then nothing else. And we set out the next group of 10 letters, and we got one agent who wrote us back and or actually called us and said, yeah, this sounds really interesting. Send me your script. But and that whole thing, that whole story, will just spoiler alert, ends with us getting lots and lots and lots of no's. But that's not the point. Um, but the whole thing of that is the overarching goal was to get the agent. The tactic of how to go about that was go for no. We knew that we had to be willing to hear a lot of no's. We had the plan. And so, whatever it is, whatever goal, dream, thing that you're going after, you can always break it down into little bite sized pieces and say, who do I need to talk to? Where do I need to go? Where are the people that can help? How many no's might I need to hear? How many no's should I be willing to hear? And those are the steps leading to that big goal or dream. Sometimes I think it can be so like amorphous. It's you've got this big thing out there. How do I ever achieve that? Well, we all know that goals are achieved by breaking them down in steps. And from a
Mhm.
go for no standpoint, it's all right. I'm going to have to ask for stuff. So who do I have to ask? What do I need to ask? What's in it for them? How can I make my asks in such a way that they would be interested or willing or even excited to help me? And how many times am I willing to ask before I give up? So all of those questions and all of that goes to achieving that big goal.